Today we're discussing the central claim of Christian faith. Did Jesus of Nazareth rise from the dead? The rise of Christianity, of course, has shaped the modern world, but are its historical origins best explained by naturalistic means, or is the explanation the first followers gave, that Jesus had risen from the dead, still a plausible option for people today? Well, Bart Ehrman is a well-known New Testament historian whose books include Misquoting Jesus, The Triumph of Christianity, and Heaven and Hell, A History of the Afterlife. Bart is an agnostic. He doesn't believe in the miraculous claims of the Bible, including the resurrection of Jesus, but he's always happy to discuss it with those who do. One of those is Justin Bass, a New Testament scholar who's taught at various institutions, including in Jordan in the Middle East. Now, Justin is a Christian, and in his book, The Bedrock of Christianity, he argues there are a number of bedrock facts concerning the death and resurrection of Jesus agreed upon by the majority of New Testament scholars. And today, he's going to be explaining why he believes the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth is the best explanation of both Scripture and history. I think, in a sense, because you're making the positive case today for the resurrection. We'll start with you, Justin, if that's okay. Can you just give us a thumbnail sketch of how you make the case for the resurrection in your book?
As Bart well knows, New Testament scholars today and over the last 250 years of biblical scholarship disagree on tens of thousands of things. But what they agree on, I think, is fascinating. And I think, we should focus on those things. We should, these are important things to look at, and I think it's valuable to know what is it they agree on, what's kind of the common ground. And so my book is basically the goal is to capture where that agreement is among scholars. And to put it simply, on these issues, it's Paul. So Paul, being a bedrock eyewitness, that believed he saw the risen Jesus. This has not been denied across the board throughout history. When it comes to his sources, when it comes to Paul's early letters, when it comes to traditions that he is quoting within the letters, Paul, it's agreed upon that he wrote those letters. It's agreed upon that he's getting these traditions from early on, probably when he hung out with Peter for 2 weeks, with James, the Lord's brother. And then we get bedrock facts that I focus on concerning Jesus' death and resurrection that come forth from those bedrock sources. And those are namely these. Jesus' crucifixion. Then we have the claim, the actual just claim of Jesus' resurrection. I think that alone is just an innovative, unparalleled, unique idea that had not been known. Nobody was expecting a resurrected Messiah, let alone a crucified Messiah, in the middle of history. The third is the appearances, which largely are cataloged in 1 Corinthians 15, one of these early traditions. And then the fourth would be, I could use the great title from Bart's book, The Triumph of Christianity. So the fourth is basically how the early Christians, starting in Jerusalem and the very place where Jesus was crucified, launched from there and went on to transform the Roman Empire, went on to transform many nations, laid the foundations of Western civilization, and ultimately, still today, the largest religion on the planet. And all the Pew Research shows throughout the 21st century is going to continue to be. We have a religious future, a religious landscape of the world in our future. So that's kind of some bare facts and sources to lay out.
It's a helpful one. Now, we're not going to cover in depth all of those facts on this conversation, and I thought we might sort of specifically focus in on maybe the last two that you mentioned, particularly the appearances and the rise of Christianity. But let's just briefly touch at least on those others, the fact that Jesus died and the claim of the resurrection. Now, presumably, you don't contest that both of those things happened, Jesus' death on the cross, and indeed that people claimed that a Messiah had been resurrected in history. Do you want to add any
Well, not much. I mean, no,
then?
it's absolutely, I think, the problem with saying that every historian agrees on something is problematic. You can't really
say virtually all.
Yeah, because of course there are people who deny that Jesus existed, and the weird thing is that there's
I mock them well in the book, and I quote you.
The strange thing is some of the people who think that Jesus didn't exist do think that he was crucified.
Right. Okay.
That's
in
an
the
oddity.
heavens. In the heavens. Yes, you're right.
Yeah. So,
I know who you're talking about.
I think just about every historian who's really worth their weight would, yes, absolutely. They'd say more things about Jesus, but they would agree on. But they certainly agree that he was crucified, and they certainly agree that afterward the disciples claimed he was raised from the dead. Absolutely.
how do we put these facts together? And I think that means probably just sketching out a little bit more about, well, why don't we start with the appearances, Justin? So tell us about these appearances. Let's find out where Bart agrees or disagrees with you concerning the nature of them and what was reported, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I think here's a way to think about the appearances. I love Acts 17. I'm sure Bart loves this chapter, and one of my favorite chapters maybe in the entire New Testament, where Paul goes to Athens and he's preaching on the Areopagus. But before that, it actually says that Paul was interacting daily with those who happened to be there in the marketplace and on the streets. And so here Paul's a street preacher, and I just love the idea of him engaging with pagans. And I like to imagine, how did Paul engage with them? What was the content? We're not told the content of those conversations. And so I like to think, in light of the appearances, I think the appearances probably would have been one of the things that he would have presented to a pagan as evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. He probably would have said something like, hey, Jesus appeared to me and I hated him. I believed he was cursed of God on the cross. I believed that, he needed to be, his movement needed to be wiped out. I was on my way to arrest Christians, and ultimately he appeared to me and he loved me and he forgave me and he can forgive you. And then maybe the pagan was kind of like a Bart Ehrman skeptic and said something like, oh, well, why should I believe you, Paul? And Paul said, well, what about Peter? Peter was his chief disciple, and Jesus appeared to him. I can introduce you to him. And what about James, his brother? And what about a group of disciples that ultimately were with Jesus for 3 years? That he appeared to them multiple times. And also 500 people even Jesus appeared to at one time. And hundreds of them, I've met many of them, hundreds of them are still alive. And you can go and investigate and talk to them about what it was like to see Jesus. I mean, I like to just imagine that it was something like that. But, I find that compelling, and I think that, that kind of layout is what Luke means in the beginning of Acts when he refers to the convincing proofs. He says there were these convincing proofs, tekmerios, this great Greek word that was used for irrefutable statements in rhetorical Greek documents. And these convincing proofs were probably the appearances, and I think that really has been
and to that extent,
that's been what's been convincing to Christians throughout the last 2,000 years.
And your contention is that most New Testament historians, be they Christian or not, agree that these claims happened, that people said that they had seen the risen Jesus or met the risen Jesus.
Well, let me get specific, because I get specific in the book. So there's actually, by my count, 13 appearances of Jesus. 4 individual appearances to individuals, and 9 to groups, 9 groups. But 4 of those, the 4 individuals, that's the ones probably we'll discuss here. The 4 individuals are the ones that are pretty much bedrock. Virtually all will accept that Jesus appeared to, or Peter believed Jesus appeared to him. James, the brother of Jesus, believed he appeared to him. Paul obviously believed he appeared to him, and then we can bring in Mary Magdalene, because I'm pretty sure Bart, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but believes Mary Magdalene also had that experience. She's accounted for in all 4 Gospels, being the first to actually witness the risen Jesus.
So to what degree do you agree that at least people claimed to have seen the risen Jesus?
I think it's probably right. I mean, Paul certainly. Paul tells us that he did. The problem with these others, of course, is they don't tell us that. So we don't have, Peter didn't leave us writings where he said, I saw Jesus. James didn't leave us writings. We don't know who the 500 were, none of this. So what historians tend to do, of course, is to examine their sources of information. And the most important thing is to know what the sources are, to determine whether they are reliable or not, and to see what they say. I mean, so we infer that I think that Peter probably did say that he saw Jesus, and I think James probably did. I don't know about the 500. They come out of nowhere in 1 Corinthians 15. There's no
Mary Magdalene?
Well, we don't have anything from her either, obviously.
I know, but do you believe that she had an experience?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
And I believe that in a lot of religious traditions, you get reports like that. And so my issue with this kind of bedrock thing is whether it's appropriate to consider these kinds of claims outside of other claims for other religious figures. Do we treat them equally, or do we provide a kind of do we say, well, it's more likely true because it's in the Bible and less likely true if it's in the Mormon tradition? or if it's in the Muslim tradition, or if it's in ancient Greek and Roman mythology, or not just mythology, ancient Greek and Roman history. And so do you give equal weight to everything? And if so, then why is it that you prefer these witnesses to the others?
Yeah,
Justin.
great question. What is the evidence? So my question would be, what is the evidence? You brought up Islam, you brought up Mormonism. Well, in Islam, this only supernatural really claim is to Muhammad. It's one eyewitness. And I agree with Deuteronomy. We shouldn't trust anything unless it's at least 2 or 3 witnesses. So we have 4 that you agree with. In Christianity, when it comes to Mormonism, again, Joseph Smith is the only person to say that Moroni appeared to him, and he says Jesus and God the Father and a lot of other strange things.
I'm not sure, Justin.
But only one person, only one eyewitness in both those cases, both those religions you brought up. But right. I'd like to hear the evidence for the Greek and Roman.
I don't know if you've studied Mormonism very much.
Oh, I've studied a lot.
There are 11 eyewitnesses, and they
to the golden plates.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're going to compare golden plates to the resurrection of Jesus?
No, I'm just saying if you're a historian, and what you're doing is you're saying we're going to trust eyewitnesses.
Okay, I'm fine with them seeing golden plates, but what does that tell us?
4 of them say they saw Moroni give them to him. 4 saw him. Who actually signed affidavits.
Half of them left the faith.
They left. No, they didn't. They left Joseph Smith.
Well, they abandoned Joseph Smith. Yeah.
But when they abandoned Joseph Smith, they continued to say that they saw Moroni. So, do you credit those?
Okay, well, that would only be 3. But to abandon Joseph Smith Smith is the foundational prophet.
It's 4 plus Joseph Smith. That's 5. I'm just saying, are you being impartial, or are you saying it's more likely because these are biblical witnesses?
Well, okay.
In those cases, by the way, we actually have their testimony.
Okay.
And it's within 100 years.
Yeah, but it's good enough.
With the New Testament, you don't have Peter's testimony or James's testimony or the 500. So you don't have 4. You've got Paul.
But what we have is good enough to convince you. For the New Testament eyewitnesses, you've already agreed that
this is exactly my point.
Jesus appeared to them.
Exactly my point. Moroni, I agree they claimed it.
But let's stick with
Moroni.
But
that isn't proof that it happened.
Right.
Who else has Moroni appeared to other than those people in history?
We're talking about a particular event. Was Jesus raised from the dead and a particular
But other things can support another event, right? So if Jesus is appearing to people, for example, all throughout history, if we have eyewitness,
that's a separate argument.
Okay.
So I think we have to take one argument at a time, because if you just start piling on arguments, we have to consider each of those arguments in turn.
Okay, but I'm just giving you my reasoning that why Moroni's not convincing.
I understand, but I don't think you've listened to my case here.
Okay.
You are basing everything you said.
Not basing everything.
You said the
we're
bedrock.
Starting with appearances. This isn't my only argument.
You said the bedrock is Paul.
So Paul being a bedrock eyewitness.
Because Paul gives us the information about Cephas and James, correct?
I said Paul is the bedrock in the sense that the vast majority of scholars agree when it comes to Paul. That's what I mean by bedrock.
How many ancient Christian writings do we have by somebody who says in those writings that he saw Jesus?
Directly? Paul.
But
how
many do we have?
We have Peter. I would say Peter wrote first and second Peter. And second Peter, Peter says that he saw
the transfiguration.
The transfiguration, exactly.
That's not the resurrection.
Okay.
So you've got
John
Paul.
saw the risen Jesus, at least in heaven, in Revelation.
You're counting that as a historical source?
Of seeing Jesus again. That would contribute to the argument. Again, that's the point, that these things go back to
Let me try again,
support
because
the original
I want us to be clear what we're talking
claim.
about.
You have nothing beyond those 3 witnesses with Moroni. Nothing.
Let me finish.
Okay.
You're saying that Paul gives us the evidence for himself. He saw Jesus, but none of the others. You think Peter wrote 1st and 2nd Peter, and but that would be 2. Mm-hmm. I'm saying that in the case of Moroni giving Joseph Smith the plates, we have 4. So if the idea is that you trust eyewitnesses who swear to what they saw, and that we're doing this impartially.
Be silent. Keep your forked tongue behind your teeth.
Okay. We're doing this impartially as historians. In other words, we're not trying to back up our faith. We're not trying to prove that we're right about something. Historians don't do that. Historians try to figure out what happened in the past, and they evaluate their sources. So what I'm saying is, if you're going to take the sources that agree with you and you say that they're probably right, not because they agree with you, but because they're reliable sources, because you've got Paul and you've got Peter, say, okay, well, I've got 4 people from Moroni giving the plates. And these people are highly religious people. The religiosity was never questioned. I am not saying that I think that it happened. I don't think it happened.
Yeah, for good reason.
But on the way you're mounting an argument for Paul and Peter, I don't see how you can exclude the argument for Moroni.
And what I was saying with when it comes to the 4 eyewitnesses, one of them is Joseph Smith.
No. There's 4 in addition to Joseph Smith who claim they saw him. So there's 5.
Okay. Well, regardless, but I guess I want to hear why if you do
multiple,
regard them as different in some way to the Mormons.
Because they're claiming a supernatural being named Moroni appeared to them. Okay. And so who else then has this Moroni figure appeared to? Because there's been other people that have claimed supernatural things have happened. But see, one of the things that I would say, well, who else has they appeared to, right?
Okay.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
And who else has Moroni appeared to?
Well,
other than those 4.
Now, I just want you to agree that's a separate argument now.
Yeah, but it contributes.
So let me.
I build a case with multiple arguments.
I get it.
It's not just one.
So when it comes to corroborative evidence of later witnesses, what about the angel? What about the Mother Mary? Now, Mary appears regularly to people. It's completely well documented. Thousands of people claim this happens. And I'm going to assume that since you're not Catholic, you don't think these appearances happened.
I'm open to the evidence, and I do think some of the stories
of
Mary is compelling. I think some of the stories is compelling.
You think she does appear to people?
But I think what the issue
No. Do you think she appears to people?
No, I don't. I don't know.
You just said the evidence was compelling.
Well, I said it's it's something to look into. I'm saying it's enough to look into.
Why don't you look into it? This would be very important.
I have looked into it.
Okay, so.
But let me answer. I think it lacks the unexpectedness. So it makes and it normally happens in Catholic context.
No, this is completely wrong. It
No.
Let's let Justin finish his point.
It normally happens in Catholic contexts. Okay.
Okay.
And so people who are already Catholic,
yes,
who expect, they pray to Mary regularly. They expect saints they pray to saints. They expect this kind of thing, and it's happened in only a handful of type of situations that have actually been confirmed by the church. But I ask you, if Mary is actually appearing to people, would that support the resurrection or not support the resurrection?
No, I'm saying that you have better...
No, answer that question.
I will answer it by telling you that we have better evidence for Mary appearing to people, many groups of people in the modern period, than we have for Jesus appearing to people in the modern period.
Okay.
By your criteria, that would mean that it's more likely that Mary is showing up. By your criteria. By my criteria, neither one happens.
Your example to parallel, to kind of thwart the evidence for the resurrection actually would support the resurrection.
No, you're not understanding my argument. I'm saying that you
But that's true, right? What I just said is true.
No, you're not understanding.
You just admitted that. You said if Mary is appearing to people, and you think there's a lot of evidence for it. I don't think so. I think it lacks the unexpectedness. The apostles, these people like Paul, Peter, Mary, were in no way expecting Jesus to appear to them. In no way. So Catholics who expect that can have an expectation for this type of thing, it makes sense why it would happen. So the arguments.
The problem is you're arguing about 3 or 4 things at once. You're arguing 3 or 4 things at once. I don't think you've read the literature on Mary because in many
I've read a lot of it. Yeah, Laurentine. Yeah.
Then you know full well that many times it's not expected. So, because if you've read the literature,
no, of course it's expected. That's the point.
No, then you haven't read the literature.
No,
there are many testimonies of people who don't expect it and can't believe it.
Yeah, but they know about Christianity. They know about people appearing
How
to
many
people. They know about the resurrection of Jesus.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
And is that different from Jesus
they're in
showing
the
up to
Christian
people?
worldview? Yeah. Where was the expectation for Jesus appearing
This is
to
a
people?
key part of what you
mean by
discussed,
people who
Justin.
knew him?
Yeah. What was the expectation?
But where's the expectation for Mary? They're not expecting her to show up, and she does.
But they're in a worldview that
they
allows
that. They are too in a worldview. They're in an
No.
apocalyptic worldview that expects
where was
the
the
resurrection.
Messiah? Where was the expectation of a Messiah rising again from the dead? Tell me that.
that isn't what generated the appearances. They
course.
thought they saw Jesus afterwards.
Of course, because he actually appeared to them.
They concluded he was the Messiah.
But if he didn't
They
appear to
weren't
them like you
expecting
believe,
the Messiah to rise.
how did they expect? Well, then how did they?
And they weren't expecting Mary to appear.
Okay, then how did they believe Jesus appeared to them?
They saw him.
Okay, so what did they see?
Well, how do we know? What do they see when they see Mary? You don't think they see Mary.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think some of the evidence for
did
the
they
Mary
see?
is they saw something.
Well, I think they saw something with Jesus too, of course.
Yeah.
I've never argued against
but
that.
that's the thing. It led them to say something that was completely unexpected.
Yes.
So I think it's
So
compelling evidence
can I just,
that it
because
actually
you
is
guys are
the
going
raised Jesus.
tend to the
Once you have a follower of Jesus like Peter say, I saw the Lord, it's not implausible. In fact, others start saying, oh, I saw him too.
So a bit of
that's
a
not
copycat
So
sort
it's
of
the
scenario.
same thing with Mary. It's exactly the same thing. And so my point is not that proves that Mary was raised from the dead or anything. My point is that if that's the kind of argument you want to make about Jesus, you can make it about other people that is just as as plausible.
Is the historical issue here then that you think that this claim that the Messiah had been raised was kind of a post facto kind of sort
Absolutely.
of rationalization of
Yeah,
these experiences they had?
They thought he was the Messiah before he died, in my judgment.
Right. So they did think he was the Messiah. And
They
then
weren't expecting him to die.
Right.
He died. One of them, two of them, three of them said, I've seen the Lord. And then they had to figure out, well, how does that work? And it must mean, if he's alive again, it must mean that God's raised him from the dead.
But there were other.
These are apocalyptic Jews. Apocalyptic Jews, the only way they can imagine life after death is an embodied existence. They don't believe the soul lives on after death. These are Jews. Jews believe that the body and soul are one thing, and that afterlife, if there is an afterlife, it's body and soul.
No,
That if they see Jesus alive afterwards, it must mean that his soul has come back into his body. How does that happen? It can only happen when God does it.
Okay.
God has raised him from the dead. Once they say they raised him from the dead and they already knew he was the Messiah, that's when they start saying the Messiah was raised.
Quick response and we'll go to a break and then we'll carry
I was just going to say, but there's other categories that they could have, as Jews, thought of. The Maccabees died horrible deaths, and they believed they lived on, exalted in the heaven. And they, you have many other examples of this kind of disembodied continuing to live on, but they will rise again at the final resurrection. But what the early Christians said is that Jesus had risen again now. The resurrection had already begun. Bart agrees with that. But where did that idea come from? That's the unexpectedness.
It came from
it's
apocalyptic
completely
Judaism.
unexpected. Right. But you're saying they put it together. You're saying they're the geniuses who put this innovative, unparalleled idea that has changed the world. That all goes back to the brain of Mary Magdalene?
I'm changing the world has nothing to do with it. The issue is, what does an apocalyptic Jew...
It did change the world, though, right?
What does an apocalyptic Jew think if they see somebody who had died, who's alive now? Now, when you see your grandmother in your bedroom 2 weeks after she died, typically today, this happens a lot, 1 out of 8 people in our country have a vision of a deceased loved one and are convinced they're alive again or that they're alive. In our context, we believe that the body and the soul are separable, and the soul lives on afterwards. So when you see your grandmother in your bedroom, as 1 out of 8 people, not necessarily your grandma, but some beloved one, typically what you think is their soul's gone to heaven, they've come down to visit me. Because that's our mentality of an afterlife.
But
apocalypticists don't have that. They don't have that view. Their view is that if somebody's alive after they died, it has to be a resurrection because the soul doesn't exist outside the body. So when they see Jesus, he's got to have a soul back in the body, which means God has raised him from the dead. That's the first thing they know, and they don't have any theology about it. It's just, oh my God, he's come back from the dead, and then they work it out.
But it should be noted that truly rock-ribbed faith and uncompromised conviction comes with its most complete power when it engages our head as well as our heart. Behold, the Lord requireth the heart and a willing mind, Jehovah declared to the early saints. And to Oliver Cowdery specifically, he said, I will tell you in your mind and in your heart by the Holy Ghost. Behold, this is the spirit of revelation. Close quote. I've always loved that particular definition of revelation. For one thing, it makes clear that all revelation that can be called revelation comes through the influence of the Holy Ghost. That is to say, that the receipt of any truth is ultimately a spiritual experience, an enlightenment facilitated and confirmed by the Holy Ghost. Secondly, that definition makes it clear that truth born by the Holy Spirit comes with, in effect, two manifestations, two witnesses, if you will, the force of fact as well as the force of feeling. Peter assumed that twofold aspect of our conviction when he said, be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you. Reasons for the hope that is in us. Reasons for our belief. I'm not a lawyer, as virtually all the Welch family men are. But I don't have to be one to understand in a court of law the power and primacy of evidence. In making our case for the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, I believe God intends us to find and use the evidence. Evidence He has given, reasons, if you will, which affirm the truthfulness of His work. For me, a classic example of substance I hope for and evidence of things I have not seen is the 531 pages of the Book of Mormon that come from a sheaf of gold plates some people saw and handled and hefted, but I haven't seen or handled or hefted, and neither of you. Nevertheless, the reality of those plates, the substance of them, if you will, and the evidence that comes to us from them in the form of the Book of Mormon is at the heart, at the very center of the hope and testimony and conviction of this work that is unshakably within me forever.